Good morning, Makoto. Welcome back. We've got another day of briefings today. Yeah, I appreciate council meeting and briefings yesterday, and then another full day today. So a lot of information to take in, but hopefully useful stuff just in terms of setting a bit of a framework for where we're at and some of the issues we have coming up for your consideration. So just to kick off briefings today, Alan is going to start the day with a koukia.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te hira tangata. Ka ronga te pō, ka ronga te ao, homie huie, taipie. And that translates roughly as unite above and below, unite within and without, unite to connect people. Listen to the night, listen to the world of light. Now let us come together. This one.
Good, Alan. Thank you. So we've had an apology from Councillor Malcolm for today. So I've had a chat with him this morning, and we'll make sure he's got the slide packs and can follow up as needed. We have.
I think Councillor Robertson wasn't well yesterday.
Yeah, she's online.
Okay, so she's got on your question.
So this morning we have Tom and Brett, and I'll let Brett do some introductions when it's their turn. So few topics to cover off. Topics to cover off from our engineering function. So we will, as yesterday, work through those questions as we go. This is very much around sharing information with you, councillors, and making sure that you get what you need. So don't be afraid to quiz these two, as you did with Nick yesterday afternoon. So with that in mind, pretty flexible around timing. We've got an hour 15 for this first one. There's sort of three core topics that the team will cover off. So over to you, Tom, Brett.
Sweet. I've got to go, Joe, and thank you for having us. So I'm Tom Dyer, I've met all of you before, but to my right I've got Brett Patterson, who is our manager for engineering. He looks after all of the staff that run our flood schemes and river engineering programs. And in the background there, we've got Jean-Luc Poyan as well, who's our manager for natural hazards. And he'll be able to chip in if there's any questions that start to head down that path. We sent out a presentation yesterday, so I was a little bit late. There's a few kind of last minute things to get through. Broadly speaking, the topics we're going to cover today are liaison groups. So we'll talk you through their recent establishment, their purpose, and how they are operating. We'll give you a pretty recent update on where things are at with the establishment of the Clutha Liaison Group too. We'll work through. There's a resolution a couple of years ago for a rates review. We'll work through that. This covers the flood and drainage schemes specifically. And then we'll take you through a bit of detail of some regional investment fund projects that are partly funded by central government. One of them has, again, got some quite recent information that you'll find valuable. So I'll take you through the liaison groups part of the slides and the rates review, and then Brett will take you through the some of the detail of the projects that make up our regional infrastructure funding. So we last year or a couple of years ago there was a resolution to re-establish liaison groups on our flood schemes. Liaison groups are essentially a group of landowners or interested parties who provide some steering and guidance for how we run the schemes. So we're their view on investments, their view on how the schemes are operating, whether or not maintenance is being undertaken appropriately, and they also provide a bit of opportunity to feed back into the community information that we might be holding, just to help get people up to date and moving forward. So broadly, we've got 3 schemes on the map there. You can see the outline of them. The one closest to Dunedin is obviously the Lower Taieri. The yellow lines denote drains, so formalised drains. The red or maroon line denotes flood bank infrastructure. It's quite zoomed out, so you can't see the detail there, but it gives you a fair idea. There are a great deal of significant flood banks within the Toko scheme. It's mostly drains, and then you can see the Lower Clutha scheme down there as well. The blue dots denote pump stations. It's where we lift water from one side of the flood bank to another. So in terms of background, we went through a little bit of this already. These have been established reasonably formally. Each has a terms of reference. Terms of reference, because we're re-establishing them at the moment, we've tried to make sure that they're relatively common. There is an opportunity for each liaison group to provide feedback on terms of reference. Terms of reference are set and established by council. So there is an opportunity at their first meeting for the liaison groups to provide feedback on those terms of reference. So they might vary slightly, depending on how that plays out for the next 2 groups. A minimum of 2 meetings are required a year, and we try to time these. And again, that depends on the preference of the liaison group. The Lower Taieri liaison group is already operating. Are looking like they're going to have more than 2 for the next little while, where everyone gets up to speed. But again, it's down to the group's preference in terms of how they want to engage. The groups are made up of typically a selection of community seats. These we've tried to create some geographical distribution to ensure that we get some level of representation from different parts of the schemes. In the past, the experience based on some feedback from community members has been that if you don't have something like that, you end up with have-nots in terms of the scheme. Certainly the perception anyway. But there's also seats for more general seats set up for interested parties as well. Robin, go.
So if the liaison committee wants to change the terms of reference, can they change the reference back? Their suggestion comes back to council for ratification.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we take the draft terms of reference through to them at their first meeting, seek feedback, and we bring that feedback back to council. Council can choose to change those terms or to endorse them as suggested by the liaison group, or can take a different path if they choose.
As I'm going to have a bit of scaffolding fun next door for a bit this morning as well. Apologies.
I'll do my best.
Your thing's busted. Maybe just change it out with another one.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yep.
So aside from, so we also have elected members sitting on those liaison groups. There's 1 seat designated for a councillor, but other councillors. So for instance, in the Lower Taieri group, we've regularly had a couple of councillors attending meetings. So there's the opportunity for that. Sorry, that one's still making noise.
Yeah. Good idea. He doesn't know it's turned off.
It should be dead now, but. So aside from elected members, there's also, for instance, in the Lower Taieri team, large stakeholder is the airport. So we've got a seat for them to provide input and to hear the feedback of the community as well. Similarly, the proposal for the Lower Clutha is to include a representation from Contact Energy as well. They're yet to provide conclusive feedback on whether or not they want to take that up, but the airport have been quite happily inputting to date and hosting the meetings for the Loa group, which has been handy. Aside from those seats as well, there's also the opportunity as the liaison group is moving through a funding cycle, if they need specific advice or specific input from an area of the community, there's the opportunity for them to co-opt for a period of time as well under the terms of reference. There's also a requirement for annual public meetings to be held as well. So we do that as staff, as a matter of course, in terms of seeking feedback. A few of you attended one in Outram recently, but there's also a requirement for the liaison groups to do something similar. We offer the opportunity to do that together or separately, depending on the vibe and what they're seeking to get out of those meetings. But certainly helps to keep them engaged with the community around them as well. So I've run you through a bit of this already, but broadly speaking, they provide an IZS function for both us and for ratepayers, and really useful when it comes for us to when we're setting up annual plan budgets or maintenance schedules or contracts. We've had good input so far from the ones on the Tauri, and we expect that to continue with others. Local knowledge and understanding is also helpful when it comes to history sometimes, as well as plenty of the ratepayers are second or third generation, so they've been here for a while and they have long-standing understanding of how the schemes operate during flood and under stress or pressure. While we have some good long-standing staff members, not that long, would be the short way of describing that. So where we are at the moment, the Tauri liaison group is established, 6 seats from across the Tauri. Process to establish it was a bit of a learning curve, but we got there in the end. We've modified how we're going to deliver that on the scheme slightly, just to make it a bit more simple. But broadly speaking, we call for nominations, go through a bit of a comms campaign in terms of helping people to understand what it's all about. Call for nominations, people put their hands up or have their hands put up for them by their neighbours, which was fun to watch. And then we'd run a AGM style meeting with a bit of a voting process. So if you turn up, you can influence who sits on those seats. It was quite competitive for the Loa Tauri. It took us quite a while to get through the voting, but we did get there in the end. And then, as I say before, it's a chance for the liaison group to influence their scope initially. That would then be ratified by or verified by council, and there's a chance for them to elect their own chair. So community member chairs the Tauri group at the moment, with support from staff. So typical agenda includes an operational update, chairperson's report. Chairperson can bring up anything they choose, and often calls for feedback from the wider group before establishing that. Go through a bit of planning and resource management activities. So, where there's land use change occurring, or the Tauri, that's certainly a hot topic. Work through things like emerging development trends, or where there's a proposal for a significant land rezoning or anything like that. With that, where it becomes light, scoping out breaks that use.
We'll just get our customer team to give a call, but we'll just carry on. I think it's really good. Those seats might be as bad over there. Sorry, we'll just keep moving.
So,
No.
Yeah, go for it.
It's one of the people round the table involved in the low tires liaison scheme, or in fact could give feedback from a council point of view about how they see. Is this a good time for that?
Yeah, I've got no issue.
Sorry, so what's the question?
Whether or not Kate could get a view of how that.
Oh, I think it's been functioning really, really well. So
Oh, yeah,
we've had Lloyd as the representative, and I've gone on as the alternate, just because the interim didn't set anything up. And it's been really, really good engagement. We're like very, very lucky to have Simon Parks. He's a very good chair, and he calmed the farm at Outram, I think. There are some interesting personalities in the space, but no, it's working really, really well. Thrilled with it.
Yeah, early days and sort of a lot we can do better, but yeah, my impression would be the same. We're sitting on the right trajectory.
Yeah, look, I have to say that the staff have, they gave them a fair range of papers to start with, but a really good detail, nothing hidden, and that's been really, really helpful and sets up framework. It's got a mixture of farmers who are feel they're most affected both as flooding and as ratepayers, but it's also got a representative from the Gordon Road group who are interested in more residential. The one representative that doesn't have is Mosgiel per se, but that would come through the community board. And it's important enough that, having only been elected yesterday, the community board chair has already been in touch with me this morning to find out about whether as a chair or and interested in getting that sorted as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and so meetings are typically pretty informal, sort of questioning back and forth. But we so far we've always found a way to move through things reasonably efficiently. So low Clutha liaison group's being set up at the moment. So we're due to have a meeting next Thursday, I think, 13th of November. So we've had nominations. Each seat has got a nominee, which is positive. Nominations closed last night. The only seat that we'll have to hold and a small election for is Clutha, 3 nominees there. All of the others were 1 each. It looks like, certainly looking at the names, it looks like everyone's going to talk to each other and figure out who they put forward and decided not to contest, which is useful and make for an efficient meeting. So that meeting we have next week. After that, we'll schedule an initial setup meeting, which will include terms of reference, feedback, election of chair, all that sort of stuff, and then we'll move into more substantive meetings early next year. And the Tokomarero liaison group will come. We'll start that setup process shortly. We have had feedback about interest in the Toko scheme, and that there may be less interest from community members in terms of establishment. We've had obviously counter views to that as well, but we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. We've got terms of reference set up. We've rolled that through council already. We'll run through the process and just see how it plays out. But we may have to do some ringing around or some have some conversations to ensure that we get on this.
On that way, and I may be incorrect understanding land ownership there, but I would almost say Calder Stewart would be a big player in that piece and ensuring there's understood representation. I don't know. Yeah, maybe a strategic one to ensure there's encourage representation. I don't know.
Yes, potentially lots of feedback. We can have a think about how we do that.
Or there may be a conflict on the other end.
I'll be landowner like anyone else, I think.
Yeah. I'm hoping that Robbie is confidently feeling like he will be the liaison group rep for this on the Lower Clutha anyway.
Wasn't getting ahead of that paper.
Yeah.
Let you guys have that conversation offline.
We'll keep moving. So that's liaison groups. Any general questions before we move on from them?
The plans. Is there plans for other ones going forward?
No, not at this stage. There's a few different ways to look at it. They are expensive timelines, like they cost us a lot of energy to set up and to maintain too, to be fair. I think once we get our systems right in terms of getting meeting timings lined up with all of the typical council activities, annual plans, long-term plans, all that sort of stuff, it should get better. But yeah, we have we've had to put quite a bit of energy into getting them set up. The other thing is level of investment and engagement in the interest in how the scheme operates varies from community to community. So, for instance, we rate, as you'll see shortly, some significant rates drawn from scheme ratepayers in both the Lower Clutha and Lower Taueri scheme. So there's some ratepayers that pay in the order of 40, 50 grand a year for this service. Decent sized dairy farms and have cash flow to be able to pay for that, and they do receive a service, but it's an 80% user pays scheme for the flood component, and the drainage component at 90% user pays. So there's some significant costs involved. So there's some significant interest in steering how those schemes are operated, which is why we get good interest on the Lower Taueri, and why we've had good interest on the Lower Clutha as well. We do have other schemes like Alex, which I think is probably the one you're referring to.
Well, it wasn't, but
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying, and sort of that it's where there's a need. Like you'd argue, most people don't even know there's flood banks there, so
Yeah.
it makes sense. And I would have said too that it becomes effectively an operational cost.
Yeah.
And I understand why you're not rushing off and doing everywhere else. So
yeah, and Alex is slightly different in that a lot of the funding we draw for Alex comes from contact. So people don't feel the costs of the scheme in the same way that they do at these other schemes. So there's a reasonably lower level of interest. And we had done some gathering and trying to understand whether or not there would be interest in other liaison groups, but broadly speaking, these three have been the ones that have been a real focus.
no thanks.
I think there are opportunities in that river management space for more broad community engagement. So community drop-in things, but less resource intensive, less frequent, and sort of more at high level, but still allow people with an interest in what you'd sort of term more river management and flood and drainage to come and engage on how we're undertaking the activity, what's planned in the coming year, and those sorts of things. So just I guess horses for courses in terms of what provides the best value, but still allows those with an interest to engage with the team.
Makes sense to me.
Cool. That's it. We'll move on to rates. So the last long-term plan, reasonably extensive submissions from scheme members about the need for a rating review. And as you'll hear shortly, there's two broad parts to that. The council undertook at the time to consider the funding and financing policy as it relates to rating of these schemes, and made some changes there. There was also at the time an effort to take some of the complexity out of the Lower Taueri scheme. So I've forgotten to put a map in, but I can bring it up for anyone that's interested a little bit later on. There's it's all online. The rating map for the Lower Taueri drainage and flood scheme includes, it's in the order of 20 zones, and the zones are quite, at the time, they were quite complex in terms of how rates were drawn from those different areas, and explaining the difference between the areas and why there was a different dollar value. While it was doable, and the rationale was all there, it's just a significant challenge without a great deal of benefit. So the submissions broadly called for simplification. So that was undertaken as a right, but always with the intention that there'd be a further rating review to occur within the next 3-year period in time for the next LTP. So we have, we've been planning that work out and just getting it all started, so that we will be ready to do that before the next LTB. So I'll take you through a bit of that now. Broadly speaking, we've made the assumption that the scope of this work would be to cover the scheme rating factors. So when we look at a scheme, like the map here, this is the representation of the lower Clutha scheme. You can see all of the different colours on the map represent different levels of draw or different rating factors. So you can pay a different rate on the dollar in terms of capital value. What we need to have a look at is how these are set out and whether or not that's still fit for purpose. The other part of rates for these schemes is that the mix of general and targeted rates, and so that is undertaken through the financial strategy and the revenue and financing policy. So that obviously was reviewed in 2024. We've made the assumption that that wouldn't be something we'd be engaging on with the community initially, and that would be something that you would look at as council through any future reviews. Or consider it through any future reviews if you choose. But we would focus on a process to review all of those maps and all the rating factors that underpin those maps. Talk to the community about simplicity versus complexity, and understand their views on that, and then look at trying to provide a few options to council eventually. That gives you a bit of sense of or gives you a refreshed model that hopefully is something that everyone can get on board with. I guess the important thing to note is that there are always assuming the same amount of funding is required to run the scheme. Any review shifts where the draw of money comes from. So if we were to end up with an option that included a slightly lower rate for more expansive wider farmland that's flooded, and ended up with a slightly higher rate tied to some of the urban areas within the schemes, it's just a redistribution of rating. If the funding required is the same, then the money's got to come from somewhere, essentially. So the Clutha review is quite long overdue. The initial scheme was set up, so the scheme was started to be built in the kind of late 60s. We are aware that there's the scheme funding model was set up on the basis of an assessment of economic benefit at the time. So what the land could be used for largely productively, and in terms of protection prior to the scheme being built, was considered against the new ability for land use after the scheme was built. And you end up with this map, it's on the screen at the moment, and the rating factors that are shown in the snippy top of the screen. It's quite hard to, so we haven't been able to produce the report that I was talking about before. We've struggled to find it. So while we know there's a basis, whenever we get a request for a review or for greater understanding of the scheme rating model, which has happened at least once in the last 12 months, we do struggle to provide further detail. And as you can imagine, that is frustrating from a customer perspective. It's also frustrating from a staff perspective. So we're just working through how to deliver this, and we've started a cursory review looking for all of the initial evidence, all of the information in terms of the initial setup, so that we know the baseline that we're working from, and shortly we'll be able to get into next steps and conversations with the community longer term. this is a reasonably complex model as well, and as you can see from the map, it's quite, rating occurs quite widely outside of the scheme as well. So you can see as you're looking northward up the coast, rates are drawn from farmland that isn't specifically within the scheme at a low level, but still drawn. So there's some as an element of input from communities or landowners outside of the initial area of benefit for the scheme. What the rationale is for that, I'm not 100% sure, and again, without the report, can't be too clear.
If we're re-looking at these things and trying to find if there is some principled position that we might want to take in the middle of there, surely the value of the land that's being rated on, and therefore the amount of the rates, is taking into account economic benefit.
Yeah, that's the other way of looking at it. So as land use is able to be changed and greater capital value is apportioned to that land, or greater capital value is invested or delivered in terms of buildings and facilities, obviously there's a greater rate draw on that property. The other way to apportion things and how that has been carried out in that Lower Clutha scheme is by looking at the change between pre-scheme and post-scheme, and so that at the moment that the way that is working is almost a doubling of the not doubling's the wrong word, greater emphasis on capital value.
Yes, it just seemed to me that, for example, on Mosgiel, if Mosgiel was, instead of being residential, a big farm, that would be treated differently. And actually, if you're an individual house in Mosgiel, the economic benefit to you of not being flooded is to do with the value of your property. And historically, it doesn't matter how you got there, the value to your piece of property is much bigger than it would have been if it was just one big farm. And of course, there's a lot more rates. You know, a lot more capital value on things, and so
Yeah, correct. And then so the other part that falls into that is the is your level of benefit. So for instance, Mosgiel's a good example. Broadly how that scheme works now is that 89% of the benefit to the scheme has been assessed as applying to the area to the south and west of the Taieri River, basically. So from Outram down to Berwick, Henley, and the remaining 11% is gathered from the northern parts of the Taieri, including Mosgiel. So while there's significant capital value in Mosgiel, only 11% of the costs are being applied to that area. So it's a thing to think about. So that's as it relates to flood. Drainage is different again. So we're just going through a process at the moment to get our understanding together of all of the current models. That's all working pretty well. Put a paper to the last Taieri Liaison Group with a simple explanation of how the scheme operates and works, and that was well received. The next step, we intend to have meetings with the two most significantly affected schemes in the liaison groups for those schemes in February. We're going to take a plan to them in terms of how to undertake this review. So when we would engage with the communities, at what stage, what questions we'd ask, all of that sort of stuff. But broadly speaking, we'll go through an internal review and pull all the options together, and then take some questions to our community in terms of understanding their interest in transparency versus complexity, and all of those sorts of things, and then try and pull some options together that give them a sense of where each option sits on the transparency to complexity scale, because essentially those are the two major levers. If you have a complex model that could be considered very fair in terms of user pays, a complex model that accounts for all of how the scheme operates and all that sort of stuff, and ends up with a true user pays cost for each land parcel, that'll be super complex and hard to understand, and becomes a bit of a burden for both the community and for us in terms of getting to consistently explain some of those costs. If you were to go with a more simple model, which is what's occurring at the moment, the fairness element in terms of being precise with where the cost should fall does come down a little bit, but the transparency is a lot easier to provide. So we'll see your feedback on that and then come up with some options.
Tom, can I just check that the scope of the external review will be signed off by the liaison groups, because that was a bear bug
So
in the past.
the liaison groups don't have the delegation to sign it off technically, but we're working on the basis that we get agreement.
Thank you.
No worries. So just as an example, if we're working through the Rating Act and some of the questions we need to ask, those questions aren't taken out of the Act. They're kind of simplified so that they don't look like legislative jargon. But broadly, we're asking what activities are we funding, what level should we ring fence the costs at, what are the primary tools for funding, and how can we draw that in as rates, what are the rating tools, how are we targeting the application of costs, and how will the differential be assessed, and then at the end you've got your how will the rate be applied to individual rating units. So all of the options that exist for those things are in the little boxes to the right. So what we've done is gone through this process to characterise the current Lower Clutha scheme. So the orange boxes represent how that operates at the moment. Same for the Lower Taieri scheme. You'll notice that the boxes are in slightly different places. It's a slightly different model, but we'd intend to go through this process and just share what that looks like, and then when we're looking at options, we can also characterise it using this model, so that people can kind of understand the differences and understand why we'd be looking at different approaches, and also where each option sits on that complexity versus transparency scale. So next steps for this, so we've got some early scoping to do with liaison groups. We started that discussion on Taieri already, and got some early feedback. There's been a couple of more recent phone calls as well, just refining things as we go. We intend to take, as I said before, some papers to the next round of liaison groups that'll include some of the background and understanding of how we look at the process from a technical point of view, but also how we'd engage with the community and get feedback from them on that. Then the idea would be after those couple of steps, we would be in a position to provide a paper to council that provided a series of options and some analysis in terms of how that would look from a few individual ratepayer case studies, but also how that looks on that transparency scale, how that looks in terms of community feedback, and how that looks in terms of feedback from our liaison groups. and offer a few options for consideration and ultimately provide you with the opportunity to make a decision. That decision would ideally undertake before the LTP process, and then would input into the LTP process for that next round of consultation.
Yeah, so I'll just speak to that, and for the returning councillors, you'll remember as part of the last LTP, we included a significant number of proposed rating changes, and it became a very complicated exercise to try and communicate the rating changes alongside the level of service and the costs that we were trying to communicate through the long-term plan. The intent through 2026 is to undertake the review of those schemes separate to what we would do for long-term plan engagement through late 26, early 27, so that there is specific conversations on the schemes and how those targeted rating structures are set up. It just became really, really challenging in my view through that long-term plan, and very complex when we were trying to have a conversation around a proposal to change how we rated those schemes, but also the infrastructure strategy and the levels of service and the projects that we were looking to undertake. And we couldn't really tell people what each of those things was going to cost because we were still trying to consult and make a decision on how we were going to fund them. So the intent and what I've talked to Tom and Nick about is to run this process independent of the long-term plan with the appropriate decision making from council all the way through, and obviously there's a lot of consultation we need to do to have something ready to plug into that long-term plan, so we don't end up conflating those two things when we go out to speak to the community. So that's the intent of the time frame and the reason why we're targeting it before long-term plan.
Can I just ask, sorry, so the process doesn't involve an external review, we're doing this all internally, and obviously it comes back to governance to make a call on where the numbers land. And
Yeah. No, so we are going to seek an external provider to undertake some of this work, but I have a view on this kind of stuff that certainly in terms of consultation and in terms of shaping those options, that it's really important that staff engage really heavily in that. And so it's not something we're going to export entirely and just wait for a report to come back. Rather something we will seek support from a consulting party, largely because this will just be really intensive for a period of time. We still need to run the schemes as well. So they'll support in doing that, and they'll support with some of the analysis, but we'll still be heavily involved in terms of guiding and making sure it's all on the right path. And largely the intent behind that is just to make sure that we're still aligned with the feedback we're hearing from the community. But also, if we're in the thick of it, then we retain that knowledge and understanding of how it will work, then it means we can continue to, it makes it much easier to continue to hone how the whole system operates when it comes to one-off engagements with community members or at public meetings and bits and pieces. But it's great, it's quite tricky sometimes.
Yeah, the questions around where you draw the line for the catchment, i.e. including the Mangatuas, whatever, and also that split between small-scale residential versus lifestyle versus rural. That having some independent guidance there would be useful. But I understand the rest of it is a lot of it is
Agree. Agree. It's going to be important to have some impartiality and independence there, but at the same time, something we definitely need to own too.
Yeah, as we know, the short answer is anytime you look at this and anytime you make a change, someone wins and someone loses. So it is important that we have the evidence to back up the conversations. But I found, and I think that's what you're getting at, Andrew, is there's got to be something there that we can hold on to and say, well, actually, we've had some advice that we're relying on. But I think that ownership component is quite important. But yeah, it'd be nice if you could come up with an option everyone wins.
If there's no more questions on rates review, we can.
Anyone else have anything on those pieces of work? All right.
Sweet. Over to Brett.
So I'm just going to run through some of our projects that we've got for funding through Regional Infrastructure Fund. We've been engaging with central government for some time now as a funding partner to help fund some of our more significant projects that we undertake within engineering. A little bit of background to that started with the Climate Resilience Fund, which was in part a response to COVID and to provide economic boost into the regions. They had 4 projects in it. They were completed quite some time ago now. The next round of funding has been rolled into the Regional Infrastructure Fund. So it was around about 18 months ago. There was an announcement for around $200 million of funding to flood protection infrastructure across the country. Tranche 1 of that was around about $100 million, which was circulated around, and almost all the regional councils in the country had a different level of funding coming out of that for their projects. We've now got tranche 2 of the funding has just arrived with us. We're working through the contract agreements for that, funding agreements for that at the moment. So tranche 1 for ORC, we had 1 project funded through that process, and that was the continuation of the contour channel on the Taieri. Funding for that from central government was about $5.4 million. That project's ticking along quite nicely, so we were in a really good position at the outset for that project with getting work started very quickly. We already had a whole lot of design work in place and even contractors engaged for the first stage of that being the construction of one of the bridges out there. We're in the very final stages at the moment of engaging a contractor to undertake the flood bank renewal work. So that should be kicking off in earnest very early next year with trucks and diggers on the ground getting into that one. The contour channel is our largest project by quite some margin, both in terms of dollar value and impact and effect. This stage of the contour channel is over quite a long distance. There's a lot of flood bank to build. There are a number of properties all on private land, all with different interests and different landowners. Whole lot of consenting considerations. We've just worked through the tail end of that now as well, but it's in a pretty good place, and we're on program and on track, both in terms of time and budget on that project.
Rick, just on that, why is the remedial work on the landslide of the channel and not on the waterside channel? So
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
on the typical cross section of the flood bank,
Yeah,
the improvement works and the geotech membrane and everything is on the
on the landward side.
land side, leaving the old structure still basically as is. I had thought there were piping issues and sort of failure issues within the existing old structures. So why wouldn't we do the remedial improvement works on the water side rather than the land side?
So the you're correct. So the old flood bank has a number of issues quite along. Obviously, there isn't the space on the wood side. Is one reason. So if we construct it onto the into the channel, we'd be reducing the capacity of the channel. So that's one reason. The construction in this particular design, so it's a little bit different to our last sections that we've constructed. In the previous sections that we've constructed, we actually removed the old bank entirely and rebuilt the bank. Through this design process, the designers come back to us and said, for the most part, the existing bank, if we treat it correctly, we get some geofabric in there and we buttress it appropriately, we don't believe we need to fully remove that bank. There will still be some areas where we do. Sure of that will depend on the conditions of the bank as we go along. But within this design, the intention is to have a slightly more efficient design than we have in the past to provide the same benefit.
And inside saying that, all of the areas that are flagged as significant concerns with piping or slumping or any of the other issues, they will be treated appropriately. But there's correct, but there's big expanses of the bank that can, this typical cross section can be used. It ends up being quite an efficient way to deliver the work.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions on that project before I move on?
I guess just quickly for the new councillors as well, so the contour channel is a structure that picks up all of the water that moves on towards the Taieri floodplain from all of the minor creeks that come off the Mongatoas, and keeps it at a higher level and runs them by gravity out to the Waipori Lake and wetland complex down the bottom, without getting it into the without getting that water added into the main Taieri River channel or allowing it to spread out onto the floodplain.
Were the landowners okay with the reconfigured grade that gets a 2-to-1 as opposed to a 1.5-to-1, possibly more manageable but instead of flat land for that portion they're getting a slope?
So yeah, so it does require a bit more land to construct, and yeah, we've worked with that with the landowners, and so far they're all reasonably comfortable with it. There will be a little bit of give and take around that, but generally speaking, yes.
Right, so that they accept that change in shape without compensation, without any other.
Not without compensation. So there's some land agreements and bits and pieces that occur through this project to realign land parcels or undertake other works. There's all of the landowners have agreed broadly to the design, but there's a number who haven't yet signed the final agreement paperwork because they're waiting to have some more detailed conversations around timing and bits and pieces, and we can only do that once we've got a civil contractor on the books and ready to go and have those conversations. So so far so good in terms of the landowner conversations. All of the designs have been considered, all of the land requirements and operability, that's all kind of clear, and hasn't been any major issues raised. The last things for the thing to work through once we've got that civil contractor contracted and ready to get on site and start talking to people, we can work through some of the details of, when's my bit going to get done, how long are you going to be here, all of those sorts of things, which are really important to start finalising some of those landowner agreements.
Okay, thanks.
So the next tranche in funding that has been announced, this was just announced in October, so it's quite fresh and a little bit more complex for us than what we've had to deal with before. We've had 6 projects approved for funding, but it's through a mix of grant funding and suspensory loan funding. So the grant funding is, grant funding agreements are pretty similar to what we've had in the past, so we're reasonably comfortable around them, but the suspensory loan agreements are a little bit different. The mechanism for those suspensory loans is they are a loan, with the intention that that loan is effectively forgiven at the completion of the works. So they're a little different, but in terms of how the funding comes to ORC, it should end up being effectively the same. 6 projects, we will have contracts directly with MB, and then there's another 2 projects that are set up nationally as national projects. So there's a telemetry project and an asset management improvement project. Those projects are going to be program managed by Environment Canterbury, but the individual regional councils who have portions of those projects will still be responsible for the delivery of those works.
Sorry, just on paper, there is a paper coming on this, just for council, because particularly again, returning councils will know we haven't had a paper on these projects as such. They went through the application process with Kānoa, and will still need to come back in terms of signing the formal agreement. So just maybe on what the plan is there.
Yes, the paper is intended to come to the, I can't remember, is it 26th or 28th of November? It's being drafted at the moment. I can't remember when this announcement occurred, maybe 2 weeks ago. So we got the agreements and the proposal around split of suspensory loans versus grants and all of that sort of stuff about 2 weeks ago. But I've taken the legal review and just made sure that those projects are all still fit for purpose in the way that they're documented in those documents, and are now preparing a report to recommend that we accept that funding and push on with those projects.
So just before, so the suspensory loans there were quite a few conversations at regional C level around the use of that. It's effectively an accounting treatment at the central government end. I don't know all the details, but Treasury and the Finance Minister will. The critical thing for us, and it's what we'll cover in the paper, is that we've got to have confidence that we can meet the conditions placed on those suspensory loans so that they are effectively written off at the end of that process. So we need to be really confident that that the conditions they are placing on them are achievable within our projects, which we are, but that's what will be set out in the paper that we ask you to consider.
So and broadly speaking, those conditions are delivered within a time frame. We deliver roughly the costs, or that any costs, any cost overruns are borne by us rather than government. And the last part is that we deliver the outcome we said we'll deliver. But that's broadly it. There's nothing tricky or niggly in there.
Yep.
I never thought I'd hear suspensory loans ever again. Back to the future. Sorry, I'm not being picky, but you've said $4.86 million of funding for tranche 2, and in the table I get 4.68. So I added it up.
Started for me to go on, Neil.
Keep them on our toes, that's good.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just, I don't know. Just,
All yours, Brett.
You want to be on finance, you want to be on finance, just trying to prove it.
yeah. Well, I'm not trying to prove anything. I just want to. Right.
There'll be a reason.
I'm sure there is.
It'll be either
It's called
mistake
transposition
or
office.
something rational. We'll have a look through it as we're working through.
Sorry. I thought there was a trick question you were going to say. You got the proper
Yeah, we
question.
should lay those out.
So the way the funding works is government funds 60% of the project budget, which and ORC funds the 40% of the project budget. Now, it is important to note that if we go over that budget, that risk sits with ORC. Government will fund up to 60%. The way we claim that funding is it is claimed on actual costs. So when we incur costs across a quarter, at the end of the quarter, we bring all those costs together and we claim 60% of those costs from government. So there is quite a bit of work in processing that and managing that process. We need to provide evidence in terms of invoices and claims and all that sort of work. So there's quite a lot of work in the background to maintain these agreements. Monthly reporting, annual reporting, these trying to find into a lot simpler than what we've had before, but we do need to report on things like employment, the diversity within that employment, program, budget, all that kind of normal stuff as well. In terms of where the projects have come from, the projects are either already within our annual plan and progressing, or they've come from our flood recovery programs. We've been quite careful to present projects that are underway in some form, so that we've got confidence in terms of our timelines and that they are actually going to deliver in the form that we think they are. It is quite important from government's perspective that the money flows reasonably close to how we program it. We're going through a process at the moment of laying out how we expect to see the spend occur over time, and that'll provide to government how we expect to to see the revenue coming in from government for that. So the projects themselves, Silverstream capacity improvement. So this is one that we've had on the go for quite some time. We're actually already quite a long way into this project. This particular project has had quite a change in what the expected costs are. When we put together the funding applications for the RIF funding, it's quite some time ago. So we're talking, probably nearly 2 years ago when some of these projects originally went up. Through the process, you don't have a lot of opportunity to change what you're asking for. So the original budget for the Silverstream was around about 800,000. We're now expecting that to cost closer to the 1.9 million mark. The fundings requested is based on the original budget of the 800,000. So at the moment, we've got $480,000 of funding available from government that will help towards the Silverstream project.
For those of you that have been on council for a while, you'll have heard the story as to why that change occurred. For those of you that haven't, really simply, when we put this proposal forward and the initial budget estimates were made, that was pre-detailed design. So our understanding of the level of fill required to be taken out of the Silverstream to create the cross section we needed for the flood capacity was much less initially. That estimate changed once we got to detailed design and got some more complete modelling done for the scheme, and that is the nature of this type of work. Unfortunately, we were in a position to then feed that into this process, gain greater funding, but at the same time. And at the same time, there's a few other cost escalations, but the bulk of the change was the volumes. And it's just a part of working in this world sometimes. Ideally, we would be further down the track of design before requesting funding for these types of things. But it's that would have meant looking a gift horse in the mouth in terms of seeking this funding from central government. So that's the kind of reason that we are where we are.
These suspensory loans, are they tied to it as a whole?
For two of the projects, we'll flag them as we go through this couple and when we get to those slides.
It's probably just worth touching on. So just on this resilience funding and the process generally. So Minister Jones is a huge supporter of this type of work and has managed to get support from Cabinet to fund, and obviously this is the second tranche. He wants to get the money out the door, and the challenge that councils have is there were only so many projects that were scoped and included in long-term plans that could confidently be put up to Kānoa to say, yes, we can deliver it, given that's one of the minister's key criteria is if you're going to put a project up, deliver it. And there were a few councils through tranche through the previous sort of COVID funding that got themselves into trouble by pitching projects that they could never deliver in the timeframes that were set under the agreements. And that was why we only had one in that initial tranche, because it was the only one that council had confidence that would be able to be delivered, the Contour Channel. We've got confidence in these ones because they were sort of in the plan, albeit they'll have to be brought forward and to enable them to be delivered, and that'll all be reflected in the annual plan. They are keen to continue with this. The benefits of this resilience work in terms of the natural hazard events that we are seeing is well understood by the government in terms of the savings by acting now rather than cleaning up afterwards. So there is likely to be future tranches, but we are running out of projects that we can pitch in future tranches. And so one of the things that the team will be working through with you is how do we progress some of those other future possible projects to get them to a point where we know whether we want to include them in future applications or not, because we have to be confident if we're going to pump them up. So there's a bit of a timing issue, and there's some conversations going on with Minister Jones and his staff at the moment around what tranche 3 might look like. But that's something that we'll have to bring to this table, because these tranche 2 projects pretty much exhaust the projects that we were confident that we would be delivering within this current 10-year long-term plan. So just something to keep in mind, in terms of some of the decisions you're going to need to make, and staff obviously have a bit of work to do just to scope them up to a point we can be confident enough in some of the numbers we have to pitch up to Kānoa as well.
Do either the loans or the grants differentiate between maintenance and capital works? So in other words, it's standard all capital. So it's all capital, because if I look at the Silver Stream, I'd argue that that's maintenance. But you know what I'm saying? So the scope.
You can always argue either way, but
Capital renewal versus new capital.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, similar to the transport space, you know, capital renewal of a road is effectively just a reseal, it's not necessarily a new road.
Yeah.
So you just, and that's one of the conversations that we have, and one of the things that's assessed, it's very much about capital works.
so we're treating this as a re-establishment of capacity.
That's well put.
Other people's money's good.
Yeah.
I don't fund maintenance,
Quality.
I do fund these other things.
I actually, before we move on from this slide, one other thing, so this project will take the lower section of the Silver Stream from at the moment, we start to see spilling on the Gordon Road spillway, and those of you that are familiar with that will understand the impact of that for a few landowners there. It's reasonably significant. That spilling starts to occur at about 115, 125 odd cubic meters a second of flow. This will put us in a position where we're closer to 175 before that starts to occur, so quite a lot bigger flood.
This is one issue that did come up at the liaison group, and I just, and it's interesting to get the actual figures. There are some cost savings that the community think can be drawn out of this, and I think having an idea of when they're applying for a resource consent involving people and where the soil has been dumped and not double handled, and I think there's a very kind view of the sediment control methods there. There are some things that have concerned the community, and I'm just putting it out there that I think we need to get those people involved in the process earlier. I appreciate that this one was done speedily, and for very good reason, but as we go on to the next tranche of work, I hope we can involve the community and look at all those savings and take up their options to help save some of those costs.
Yeah, so you're quite right, Kate. The community out there in the liaison group is actually been quite valuable in that space, and providing some of those connections in the community to help with some of these issues.
I've just add that at the same time, we did, that same group provide some feedback on sediment control and the practicality of that, of the methods we used and all of that sort of stuff. And I agree with them. You know, we're always bound to get a flood come through and wash a bunch of sediment away anyway. But at the end of the day, we're in a position where we have to take all the measures that are generally accepted by the industry to control sediment and protect waterways. So whenever we get that feedback, we kind of take it on board as much as we can. But at the same time, there's some things we can do something about, and there's others that are less within our sphere of influence to change in a hurry. So we'll keep chipping away at everything that we can.
There are some costs in there that just.
So we've got about
Sorry.
6 or 7 minutes. I think you're gonna flip through the other 5 tranche 2 projects.
So this is one of our, it's actually a flood recovery project, this one. So over successive floods, there's been quite a lot of damage to the bank down there that protects Kaitangata. So this project is a renewal of that bank. 450 meters long and a routine bank. Just a nice little earthworks job. Hura flood bank strengthening. So in the October 24 floods, the Purua flood bank suffered quite a bit of damage, and we noted through that process that there was a number of areas in it that are in pretty poor condition. So this project is still reasonably in its early days. The investigation work is happening down there at the moment, with the intention of renewing that bank and bringing it up to a decent standard. Riverbank Road down in Clutha. So this is a section of the Clutha where we have a flood bank that's very close to the river itself. On the outside of a bend that's quietly eroding away quite happily. The intention here is to move the bank out of harm's way in terms of erosion from the river. So we're working through the landowners down there with the intention of shifting the bank back into the farmland and just providing some distance from the river to the flood bank, which will allow us to get some vegetation established in there and get it protected. The Lower Pond outfalls, East Torre, we've had some piping issues through that structure and through the bank around the quite large culverts pass through there. So this is the discharge point for the Lower Pond. The intention here is we're going to do some work to the gates. The original project plan here was to replace the culverts, but they're actually in not too bad condition. So we'll line the culverts instead, replace head walls around them, and do some works to the gates to protect that structure. The pure outfalls down at the Clutha mouth. We suffered quite a lot of damage down there through the October 24 event. A significant breach through the training line, damage to the culverts, a whole lot of drainage related issues. We've been working down there for quite some time now. We've reinstated the training line to a level. It's not complete as yet, still needs to be raised once new culverts are installed. The training line then effectively maintains the mouth of the Clutha River in its place. If the training line wasn't there historically before it was built, it allows the mouth of the Clutha to migrate down the coast to the south, which changes the dynamics of how the river works and how the flood scheme works quite significantly.
Occasionally it shuts, it has historically shut as well, and there's huge cost and energy required to reopen it. We do get into that situation. For those of you that don't know, there's two mouths for the Clutha, and you can get flow moving preferentially and changing, but when you get a sandbar that covers this mouth in particular, it does compromise the scheme capacity, or can compromise the scheme capacity quite significantly.
So we're taking the approach of getting the training line re-established to protect the mouth. We're now in the process of installing some very large new culverts down there to maintain the drainage coming out of the Pure River. So the entirety of the Pure River passes through the training line on its way out to sea.
Have we solved the issue with the culverts, the laying issue with the culverts?
Yeah, about to get started on the first one in the next couple of weeks. A bit more concrete, is the answer.
More concrete.
How are you doing?
Just a bit more concrete.
Have you, have you run that past Peter? Sorry.
I haven't heard from Peter for a while, but I expect that I will any day now.
Still using plastic pipes, just.
Correct, yeah, it's still the same pipes, just bells.
And cost wise with that, where are we tracking with that?
Still not far away from that $2 million value. So we've pitched it at in terms of funding. Probably a little increase on that. But we're going to get this first culvert in and reassess what our actual costs look like as we move through that, and then come back to council with a few options to really finish that job, whether that be reduce the number of culverts or provide a bit of additional funding. The other thing we're yet to complete is we've been waiting for this RIF funding announcement. Obviously, the funding picture provides a different lens in terms of what work you would undertake. Another part of the funding picture with this is a contribution from Contact Energy. So until we knew what government was providing, finalising that conversation was always going to be a bit tricky. We're in that position now, so we can go back and work through those costs with them as well, and then bring something back to council.
Right, so there's still a degree of confidence concern around if you're going to do one culvert in that goes. We're still in a position of unknown for the others.
There's a bit of an opportunity in that. The procuring the precast concrete and all that sort of stuff had some reasonable lead times. If we bought all six, the panels for all six and at the same time. But if we bought for one, get them a bit more quickly. So we've taken delivery early on. It enables us to get one in before South Road would normally take a stand down period at Christmas anyway. So it just enables us to slot that first culvert into this gap between where we are at the moment. The river flow is still quite high, so conditions are favourable for installing this stuff. But as those river flows start to drop, we should have enough time to slot that first culvert in, prove the concept on in terms of design, and then the last five we can, if that all works out favourably, the last five we can just get done early next year.
So basically, methodology risk is still sitting with us as opposed to the contractor.
Yeah, there's still a little bit we're carrying, but we have worked that through in far greater detail now after experiencing the ballast challenges earlier in the year.
Pump station river mouth telemetry. So this is part of the national project. We have no telemetry within our pump stations at the moment. So that means that our operators during an event or any time need to actually go and visit those pump stations to make sure they're operating, make sure there hasn't been a fault, make sure there's no significant weed build-up, all those sorts of things. This project will allow us to get some telemetry installed so that we can do that remotely, free up time for our operators, and provide more confidence, particularly during events, as to what's happening at our pump stations. To go along with that, we're looking at getting some telemetry installed at a number of river mouths along coastal Otago. Okay.
So will that include cameras?
Yeah, it's part of the scope. Yeah, at this stage. How we deliver that is that'll be interesting. But yeah, it is part of the scope.
Great, thank you.
Talking about the DTP solutions guys and their cameras and monitoring stuff.
Yeah, there's a few options out there.
Working on quite really good stuff.
Cool, thank you.
And you're monitoring at our river mouths again to provide visibility to those river mouths, so we don't need to have operators driving out in the middle of the night and that sort of thing to manually check them and make sure they're clear. That is the projects.
Right, so
this is a really important area for us. I mean, obviously the briefing we're covering a wide range, but in terms of the risk that the council carries, our flood resilience and the assets we are responsible for it is critical for us to ensure they are operating as designed. So you will continue to hear a lot about this, and I think is it Gary and Gretchen Science and Resilience that was reading yesterday, wasn't it, Gary? So that they're Gary and Gretchen working really closely with the team to get a really good understanding of this work program, and working very closely at a national level with river managers and other councils to ensure that sort of high level of service and best practice is achieved. It's very clear after some of those issues in the North Island that we need to be very aware of that and doing the job well. So it is also something that has a significant rating impact because it is a very expensive part of our business. Public transport and engineering are the two that can have the biggest impact. So we also just need to make sure we are keeping you abreast of sort of some of those financial implications of that work as well. The one that wasn't touched on today, but we will at some point, is river management, which is also a very topical subject, and that is right across the region, not just within the flood and drainage schemes. So we'll make sure you're sort of brought up to speed on those ones as well. So we've got morning team now, and we've actually got the balance of the tier 3 managers, probably not all of them, but a lot of them just down, give you the opportunity to meet them. So you've obviously met ELT, but the managers, of which